It's not the first time they've used a psyop or fake news to try and promote fear or terror. I'm going to show you what happened 80 years ago. Now, of course, they've been doing this sort of thing for a long time, using fake false flag attacks and stirring up fear. But you must remember, whenever they do this sort of thing, like happened 80 years ago, they learn from it. It's part of a learning experience. They watch how the public reacts, what they can get away with, how to put it on across over the media, and every time they do something like this, they learn a bit more.
Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
When Orson Welles' electrifying adaptation of War of the Worlds aired on the radio 80 years ago, it was said to have sent Americans running into the streets in panic, believing Martians were attacking Earth. But did it really cause mass hysteria? What happened, and where did the story of panicked listeners come from? We have the facts. In 1938, the U.S. was a country on edge due to years of economic depression and the winds of war swirling in Europe. This was the setting when Welles and his troupe took to the air with a faux show featuring a report of an explosion on Mars leading to a Martian invasion. Intermittent simulated news bulletins and music, all based off H.G. Wells' 1898 science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds.
This radio show that, according to all of the reports, had sent untold thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions who knew listeners fleeing their homes, grabbing shotguns, loading their family in the car and taking off for the hills because they believed that Martians had landed in Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Americans woke up to their papers the next morning to see headlines about a radio program that had sown terror and panic across the country. The Associated Press included reports like, Pittsburgh, a man returned home in the middle of the broadcast and found his wife with a bottle of poison in her hand saying, "I'd rather die this way than like that." Indianapolis, a woman ran into church screaming, "New York destroyed. It's the end of the world." The Washington Post reported one Baltimore listener died of a heart attack during the broadcast, but no one followed up on the story to provide further details. The New
You get the idea. They do exactly the same nowadays. The question is, are they doing it just for ratings, or are they experimenting to see what they can get away with, what they can make people believe? I think it's probably a bit of both. We're used to it now because we see it all the time on the TV.
There are literally dozens of patents dealing with ways of beaming sonic transmissions directly into people's minds. This was once called telepathy. Today it's just modern day technology and advertising. Yes, I understand this sounds absolutely bizarre. Where's the proof? Where is it? We've recently seen Al Gore and Prince Charles appear in holographic form. But do we actually know of any such encounter we can attribute holographic technology as to having been used as part of a supernatural psyop? I believe we do. It's just a matter of looking at information. ABC News by ex-CIA spy John Kiradu. The topic was waterboarding. Kiradu came out in an un-CIA-like fashion and proclaimed that waterboarding is torture. On the ABC News website, in an article entitled, "Coming in from the Cold, CIA Spy Calls Waterboarding Necessary but Torture," the ex-spy described the effectiveness of waterboarding on captured Al-Qaeda member Abu Zubaydah, and I quote, "John Kiradu, now retired, said the technique broke Zubaydah in less than 35 seconds. The next day, he told his interrogator that Allah had visited him in his cell during the night and told him to cooperate. Now, hold it for just 1 second. We believe this man is telling us the truth because he's playing nice and claiming that waterboarding is a bad thing. But look at what he just said. He's implying that when someone is tortured, they just have to say uncle, and then we stop. You would think that if Zubaydah was cracked in 35 seconds, that would mean he was spilling the beans only seconds after that. As in, okay, fine, I'll talk, please, no more, no more. Not, oh my goodness, I'm glad you stopped. I didn't like that very much. I guess I'll go get some sleep, and I'll think about maybe telling you something tomorrow. And if we are to believe that it was indeed the waterboarding that broke him, then why would he bother telling his interpreter that Allah had visited him in his cell during the night and told him to cooperate? His interrogator knew he was waterboarded. He wasn't going to save any face with his interrogator. Remember, they broke him the day before, and they didn't get any information out of a quote-unquote broken man until the next day after he claimed Allah came to him in his cell and told him to cooperate. I'm not making this up. Watch for yourself. Pay attention to the body language. You decide for yourself if this makes any logical sense.
And that was one of the techniques.
Waterboarding was one of the techniques.
Yes. And was it used on Zubaydah?
It was.
And was it successful?
It was.
What happened as a result of that?
He resisted. He was able to withstand the waterboarding for quite some time, and by that I mean probably 30, 35 seconds.
That's quite some time.
Which was quite some time. And a short time afterwards, in the next day or so, he told his interrogator that Allah had visited him in his cell during the night and told him to cooperate because his cooperation would make it easier on the other brothers who had been captured. And from that day on, he answered every question just like I'm sitting here speaking to you.
In a willing way?
In a willing way.
So in your view...
And after watching that, I can only come to one conclusion. This man was not waterboarded. If he was waterboarded, he was not broken during the waterboarding. He was broken through a psyop. If he was broken from the torture, he would have spilled the information right then and there. I think what you're seeing here is an experimental use of cutting-edge holographic technology to see if people will buy it, to see if it's believable. And just in case, the serpent.
course, some of that sounds rather fantastical, and I think it probably is. But then we remember that they're launching all these satellites, and there's going to be at least 42,000 satellites overhead. And then we also remember they're going to put 5G everywhere, and they're putting towers up all over the place. So, something's going on. They want to vaccinate us all. Something's going on. Something strange is going on. I don't care what anyone says, but this is all. None of what's happening is normal. Something is going on. And then there's this. Have a look at this. This was written. This article was written by the Washington Post in 1999. That's 20 odd years ago. 22 years ago.
It looks like your average city skyline, but in fact, these images are just an elaborate optical illusion. The amazing mirage appeared over Huangshan City in East China at dusk on Thursday. Following a heavy downpour, the spectacular images of mountains, buildings and trees appeared in the thin mist above the Shinan River. The phenomenon began at about 5 p.m. local time, to the amazement of passers-by.
It's really amazing. It looks like a scene in the movie, in a fairyland.
Although residents say that similar sights have been seen lately, most agreed that this one had been the most impressive.
Appearing in the sky that cannot be so easily explained away. And I don't know if you guys remember back in 2012 when an entire African village saw what appeared to be a city floating in a cloud over their village. And the way they described it was beautiful tall buildings inside of it with tarred roads and cars. It was like a flying city, and from it I could hear the sound of machines making noise just as you would hear at a Shaka cement factory. Obviously that wasn't a reflection of their city, because they don't have tall buildings, they don't have tarred roads, so either all of these people were on crack and they hallucinated this, or somebody's playing with their toys over an area where they know people aren't going to have cell phones and whip out their iPhone and be able to film it. And I know some people have said it, and it was the first thing I thought of too, Project Bluebeam. There are people that claim that Bluebeam was never really an actual thing the government ever considered, that it was entirely made up. And I just want to point out to you that it's not. I actually came across this article in unrelated research, and it turns out they're talking basically about Bluebeam in here, and I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's an article from the Washington Post from 1999 called "When Seeing and Hearing Isn't Believing." And they're talking about PSYOPs in here, and the different things they came up with. Get to this part where it says, Allah on the holodeck. It talks about all these PSYOPs that the Pentagon was planning against the Iraqis after the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. And one of the things they came up with was, what if the U.S. projected a holographic image of Allah floating over Baghdad, urging the Iraqi people and army to rise up against Saddam? A senior Air Force officer asked in 1990. According to a military physicist who was given the task of looking into this idea, the feasibility had been established of projecting large three-dimensional objects that appear to float in the air. But could they do it over Iraq? And it says that they calculated that projecting such a hologram over Baghdad several hundred feet would take a mirror more than a mile square in space, as well as huge projectors and power sources. And they weren't sure what Allah looked like. But then it goes on to say that the Gulf War hologram story might be dismissed were it not the case that Washington Post had learned a super secret program was established in 1994 to pursue the very technology for PSYOPs application. The holographic projector is described in a classified Air Force document as a system to project information power from space for special operations deception missions. So they were going to do it. They were looking into it. And that's back in 94. So in 90, they came up with the idea, started looking into it. In 94, they were pursuing it. Who knows what they actually have today? But they probably wouldn't test it here where every other person and their grandma has an iPhone. They're going to test it in places like in Africa, in some village where they're banking on the fact that the people aren't going to have iPhones. Not only that, but I just want to point out really quick, and by now you're probably figuring out that this mysterious sighting in China just gave me an excuse to talk about this article. But they also had a technology that takes a 10-minute digital recording of someone's voice and is able to clone their speech patterns in order to develop an accurate facsimile. So Los Alamos National Laboratory, they were coming up with that back in the 90s. Meaning all of these people today, for example, who, I don't know, commit crimes because they hear Obama's voice telling them to do it, may actually be hearing a psychotronic weapon with Obama's voice, because apparently the PSYOPs team at Los Alamos was coming up with stuff like this back in the 90s. And all it takes is a 10-minute clip of someone's voice. You know, take one of Obama's speeches, 10 minutes, and you can make him say anything and it sounds real. This is the kind of stuff they had like 2 decades ago. Can you imagine the stuff they have today?
Well, the picture of the Chinese city in the clouds that was shown on CNN, it was probably fake. That was faked by the looks of it, because somebody has debunked that and done a pretty good job of debunking that. I'll place a link if I can remember. But the picture of the city floating on the river, that was real. That was real. There were witnesses on the bridge. You could see that were pointing to it. It wasn't a photoshopped or a fake picture. It was real. So there has been some strange things happening, and they have the technology nowadays to do all sorts. I'll show you in a minute. I'll show you some light shows that people at first thought were flying saucers. One of the light shows, they thought it was a flying saucer. Yeah, it wasn't. It was just drones. It was drones, and they can be used as well for that sort of thing.
That there would be some sort of malfunction in a couple of the operators, and you'd see a couple fall out of the sky. If they were drones, they would contact their blades. Is this some sort of basic advertisement that they still haven't basically figured out on how to make it work?
I'm seeing on the bottom there's reflection on whatever, some kind of lake or river below, some kind of stream, and the people within the car, they're basically stunned. They can't explain what they're witnessing. And again, wouldn't you be stunned? Out in the middle of Sacramento, California, obviously it's a little small city, but we're doing some investigation, and as of yet we have not found any rhyme or reason of what's going on over there, but maybe tomorrow might be a different
Potter's Clay came out with another great video, and this is something that we've talked about many times. But look at this, and I'm going to play the audio so you can hear the commenters that are commenting on what we're seeing here. So here we go.
What is that?
Fireworks or something.
Aliens? I don't know.
What the heck
Where
is
is that? You see it, right?
I'm actually, yes,
Okay.
I do see it.
Okay.
It's getting weirder by the second.
I know.
It's like they're sticking around.
We're gonna do some
Anybody?
digging and.
All right, so basically you can't hear it. It's not very loud, but this is something that we've absolutely predicted is going to be happen, with the alien invasion thing. And like I had mentioned many times, Dr. Carol Rosin was told by Werner von Braun that the final ace in the hole would be an alien invasion. Okay, right? So the mainstream, what is their nonsense response to this? And of course they want people to think it's absurd because they want people to think, oh, well, the aliens really are real. So the mainstream comes back and says, what is it? It was later proven that the lights were nothing more than a big flock of seagulls. Oh my God, right? Like that's, now I don't know what it is. I don't purport to know what it is. In fact, it's probably, it could be a holographic thing. I'm not sure what it is. But I'm sure what it isn't. It's sure as hell no flock of seagulls. That's just retarded to even say that, right?
Really? Goodness gracious. I've never heard something that wild. It didn't look like seagulls to me.
No. But again, and that's what of course, they want people to think that's preposterous, right? Well, there's no way. It's got to be aliens, right? Thus further cementing the idea that aliens are here and that, outer space does exist and all this crazy stuff, when in fact, they don't, and even if there are other life forms, it's probably from other areas of the plane that we can't access. Again, we don't know, but it's very clear what they're trying to do. And you wouldn't see all this stuff on mainstream news if this was such a top secret thing, right? That the mainstream is leaking it out and people are leaking out about aliens. What a bunch of BS. And I have to say, and John, I know you're in the same boat. At one point I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. 100%, thank you, Richard Hoagland. But now I know he's a liar, and I know that, that we just see these plans coming forward and manifesting every single day. So just something that people need to be aware of. And of course, Potter's Clay also, shows the interview where Carol Rosin's talking about what Werner von Braun told her. This is a great video, as far as what's coming. And of course, I don't need to say what, Werner von Braun had on his tombstone when he passed away, Psalms 19:1, the firmament sheweth his handiwork. Great. So, anyway, take that for what you will, but I just think it's we're going to see more and more so-called evidence of UFOs coming out. And of course, it's been rampant in Mexico for years. But it's at the point now where probably 80%, if not 90% of the population of the plane believes that there are aliens from other galaxies here. But that's all part of the plan, isn't it?
Are those fireworks? What is that?
They look like some fireworks or something.
Aliens? I don't know.
What the heck
Where
is
that? You see it, right?
I'm actually, yes,
Okay.
I do see it.
Okay.
It's getting weirder by the second.
I know.
It's like they're sticking around.
We're gonna do some
Anybody?
digging and figure out what that is. Back in a moment.
Are we rolling on that?
What do you think that was? Are those fireworks? What is that?
They look like some fireworks or something.
Aliens? I don't know.
What the heck
Where
is
is that? You see it, right?
I'm actually, yes,
Okay.
I do see it.
Okay.
It's getting weirder by the second.
I know.
It's like they're sticking around.
We're gonna do some
Anybody?
digging and figure out what that is. Back in a moment.
Are we rolling on that?
What do you think that was?
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played. Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are a dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable idea. The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in 74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now, at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it, he said, is a lie. The last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it, he said, is a lie.
There is information coming from another world, and once it is confirmed, it is going to require a rereading of the gospel as we know it. And that's the kind of information that we are receiving from the highest levels of Vatican intelligentsia.
Where's this headed, in your opinion, after all this research?
I think it's headed towards an imminent great deception.
In 2011, a group of people on the Ivory Coast of Africa saw a light in the sky. It wasn't just a light in the sky, it was a diamond-shaped light in the sky. And it was so vivid, so compelling, that for that moment, that group was transfixed by the light. And it changed their lives.
The world, what people believe. I mean, statistics in the United States say around 50% of Americans already think that UFOs are aliens visiting the Earth. Now, there was a recent poll in the United Kingdom. More people believe in extraterrestrials in the UK than God. Okay? And that's a fact. And so to me, the strong delusion is already here. The groundwork has been laid. And our hypothesis is these powers and principalities that Paul writes about in Ephesians 6, these demonic forces have seeded this idea into the world, so we are primed and ready.
Science fiction has exploded in America and the world as a staple theme for films, movies, books, and video games. Could this all be part of the plan to prepare the world for disclosure? A 2008 Scripps UFO poll showed that over 74% of 18 to 24-year-olds believed it was likely that intelligent life exists on other planets.
The New Age, as well as the mainstream sort of media, and I mean like movies and television shows, and everybody's been shoving this alien UFO thing down our throats because it has so many uses for the Antichrist system. It is just a really convenient way if it does go down like this, because it does do three main things that are needed for the Antichrist system. Number one, it causes the world to reject God. We've been sold this erroneous idea that if aliens exist, then God doesn't. So the headlines the day after would read, you know, God proven wrong or whatever. The whole world would be united in its rejection of God overnight. So that certainly would play in, obviously, to the biblical account of this world order at the end of time. Also, we would believe ourselves to be God. This one would.
Scholars with no religious affiliation who have looked into this topic of UFOs and ETs for several decades have come to very interesting conclusions. Jack Vallée, who helped build the precursor to what we know as the Internet, in his book Messengers of Deception, Vallée states, quote, "Human beings are under the control of a strange force that bends them in absurd ways, forcing them to play a role in a bizarre game of deception." End quote. Later in the same book, he states, quote, "The UFO phenomenon represents a manifestation of a reality that transcends our current understanding of physics. The UFOs are physical manifestations that cannot be understood apart from their psychic and symbolic reality. What we see in effect here is not an alien invasion. It is a control system which acts on humans and uses humans." End quote.
The planet as God? Tell me about that.
They're having astrobiology conferences. They've made it intellectually virtuous to believe in these extraterrestrials. Their writings coming out of their theologians have pretty much made the argument that if you don't believe in extraterrestrials, then that is actually the heresy.
You talk about that the Vatican is going to reevaluate their position on basic Christianity. What do you mean by that?
Well, their theologians have written that they think that these entities will be evangelizing us, that they think the chances are that they're not fallen and we are, so that we would have to modify our beliefs according to their revelation.
So are they talking about setting up teams to evangelize humans and aliens? Is that what you're really talking about?
Well, if you get on the internet right now, you'll find
and baptize them?
Hundreds of articles from the Vatican astronomers talking all religions point to the same God. And this is a really acceptable notion in today's society. Like, to talk about hell or eternal punishment or the exclusivity of our Messiah, Yeshua, is the thing that most people don't tolerate.
But you see, all these things the Bible says is black and white. They've got to be watered down for there to be a one-world religion, for people to welcome in an antichrist. You've actually researched with Vatican astronomers. What do they tell you?
Yeah, it's extraordinary. We even had the opportunity to go to Mount Graham in Arizona, which is where their Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope, called that, where it's at, where the Vatican's astronomers study the deep space. And in the course of doing that, getting permission through the Arizona State University to go there to meet with their astronomers, the Jesuits who are there, we also got access to top astronomers that work in Rome, including an astronomer by the name of Guy Cosmonago. He's one of the top astronomers for the Vatican.
What was the major thing you got from your interview with him?
He says, without apology, that very soon the nations of the world are going to look to the aliens for their salvation. Now, when you make a comment like that...
Did you just hear what he said? Does that show you how fast things are moving and how we're really in the last of the last days?
Up on top of Mount Graham in Arizona, there's an observatory complex that consists of 3 very high-powered telescopes. One is the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. There's a radio telescope, and then there's one called the Large Binocular Telescope. This is the most powerful telescope in the world. In fact, they told us they can get better images of space than the Hubble Space Telescope can. Now, attached to this telescope is an infrared camera named Lucifer. Now, what this instrument's used for is astrobiology, for looking for exoplanets, looking for other worlds. And the infrared spectrum is also very useful for seeing things that can't be seen with the naked eye. And many UFO researchers have noted that you can see a lot of ships and entities that you normally can't see.
There is a professor for the Pope's University in Rome, and he is a very highly respected intellectual. His last name is Tanzaniti, and he has written a paper now in which he is saying that very soon, not right in the beginning, we won't have to deny our Christian faith in the beginning. But there is information coming from another world, and once it is confirmed, it is going to require a rereading of the gospel as we know it. And that's the kind of information that we are receiving from the highest levels of Vatican intelligentsia.
Where's this headed, in your opinion, after all this research?
I think it's headed towards an imminent great deception. I think they either know something or they suspect something, and that's why they're preparing the Catholic faithful. And of course, the Vatican has reached beyond Catholics, but they're trying to prepare the world.
The UFO alien thing is going to be the way that the one.
Guys, what is going on?
Strange sounds are being heard around the world. In Sweden, this sure sounds like a trumpet. In Michigan, another trumpet-like sound. In British Columbia, Canada, Dr. Glenn McPherson says he heard a strange humming sound in his home. At first, he thought it was an appliance.
Ultimately, I cut the power to the entire house, and the sound got louder.
Then he discovered he was not alone.
This is in fact a worldwide phenomenon, and I'm calling it the worldwide hum.
Check out his Hum Map Data project. To date, some 17,000 civilians and scientists from around the world who call themselves hummers have reached out to him, saying they heard the same thing. McPherson thinks the mysterious hum could be caused by low-frequency sound waves that sound like this.